I just want to start with reporting on something that was in today's Times. The irony, and I don't know, they waited till now to publish it. They found something in 2009, and they're just reporting on it now. What is it? It's a large, table-sized artifact found in a synagogue in the Galil, excavated, and it comes from during the Second Temple period. And it has, it's not just flat, but it has sides. And on the sides, there are very elaborate carvings of the temple in Jerusalem. And this has caused a major revolution in the thinking of at least some historians. I'll omit a snide remark. Their thinking was that synagogues, what we call synagogues, but the Knesset, were like community centers during the Second Temple period. A place where people got together and maybe they talked and discussed and debated and planned community actions and so forth and so on. And then, when the temple was destroyed and the sacrifices no longer could be offered, then it was turned into a place of prayer. That was their attitude. But then why would you have one of these community centers at a time when the temple is existing and the sacrifices are going on, using those motifs to decorate this community center? Maybe, could it be that the Beit Knesset, the community center, was used for prayer even then? And that's upending all their assumptions about the way in which prayer developed and so forth and so on. Now, that's especially ironical for us because our tradition tells us that organized prayer was invented at the beginning of the Second Temple period. Prayer and sacrifices went hand in hand for 420 years. So of course, a Beit Knesset in the time of the Second Temple was used for prayer. Of course it was. Prayer had been going on for hundreds of years. The end of the Second Temple period. Why these historians of Judaism don't take seriously our documents? You have to ask them. Our documents are just fantasy, they're made up, they have no historical value. And all of a sudden, there's a direct confirmation for it. Indeed, the Talmud is very careful with its language. When it describes the creation of formalized prayer, it uses the word kineged. The prayers were created to correspond to the sacrifices. Not in place of the sacrifices, but to correspond with the sacrifices. And indeed, if you want to trace it back further, there's a famous verse in Isaiah where Isaiah is talking about when the temple will be restored and rebuilt. And the verse says, Rabbi Yosim el har kodeshi, v'simachtim bebeis tfilasi, olotzehem v'zivrehem l'rotzon al bizbechi, ki beisi beis tfilo yikarei l'chol ha'amim. I will bring them to my holy mountain and cause them to rejoice in my house of prayer. Their sacrifices will be acceptable on the altar because my house will be called the house of prayer for all nations. Now, if you read that verse and pay attention, it could raise questions in your mind. Isaiah starts by calling it a house of prayer. Then he describes what's going to happen there. What's going on there is sacrifices. And then he says, because it's a house of prayer. So how is house of prayer the right title for the temple in which sacrifices were offered? Apparently, in Isaiah's mind, prayer and sacrifices go hand in hand. And the place of sacrifices is called house of prayer. That's Isaiah at the end of the First Temple period. What about Solomon? Solomon built the temple. And the beginning of the book of Kings, first book of Kings, chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, Solomon dedicates the temple. You go and read it. I recommend you read it. The only activity that Solomon associates with the temple is prayer. If all you had was Solomon's dedication, you wouldn't know that there were sacrifices there at all. When Jews pray there, please hear them. When Jews pray from other places, their prayers will go to you through the temple and hear them. When non-Jews pray, hear them also and answer them. That's all he talks about. So, prayer and sacrifices go hand in hand in the earliest sources. The temple was destroyed. There was no organized prayer, but idea of prayer, the performance of prayer, the spiritual entity of prayer exists all the way back. Isaac prayed for his wife to become pregnant. Moses prayed for his sister to become cured of leprosy. At the beginning of the Second Temple, the rabbis got together and organized prayer to correspond to the sacrifice. That's what it says in the Talmud. Prayer corresponds, keneged, the sacrifices. And they went hand in hand for 400 years. So finding this table, this Magdalene stone in the Galil, which was from a synagogue, and it clearly indicates that it has a relationship to the temple. It's carrying over the spirit of the temple. For us, that's gold. We've been saying that since 2,500 years ago. But this upset all the Jewish historians, because now there are theories of how prayer arrived in synagogues as a result of the destruction of the Second Temple. All of that, of course, is now bunk. And now they have to rethink of course, had they taken our sources seriously, even as a possibility for investigation or thought, then it wouldn't be so upsetting. But they don't take our sources seriously. Our sources count for nothing. So it's just, and this goes on all the time. Pay attention. The archaeology, the last 10 years, the number of things that have been found which correspond to our tradition are really astonishing. And you get old enough and live through enough of it, and you accumulate these findings, you begin to feel that the critics are just willfully ignoring what is historically valid material. Okay, now talking again about Greece and our attitude towards Greek life and Greek values. One of the things that Greece stressed as a cultural value is beauty. They excelled at painting and at statuary, architecture. Indeed, now I'm not a historian. I'm reading snippets here and there, so I speak under correction. But what I've read, one of the things that the Greeks introduced is the idea that beauty is not something that belongs in a museum. Everyday life should be surrounded by beauty. So you have functional vessels for use in the kitchen or use in dining with beautiful pictures on the vessels. It's not something you do as a localized, specialized activity like going to a museum, but it's something you should be surrounded by in life. Why? The philosophy of beauty is just as confused today as it has been for thousands of years. There's no clear understanding of it. But many simply recognize that there is something in experiencing, contemplating, interacting with your mind, your sensitivities, your heart, with a thing of beauty, does something good for a human being. What exactly good it does, I had one professor who told me it was all cognitive, because that was his bias, and he made some very good points. That was Nelson Goodman, who wrote a book called Languages of Art. And there are many others, whether it's catharsis, releasing pent-up emotions and giving you better emotional health, but people recognize, and every culture has this expression of beauty, though some of the styles vary, but some of them are common, and every culture has an appreciation of beauty. Now, does Judaism, does the Torah care about beauty? Is it a topic? Is it anywhere mentioned in any positive or negative context? Well, as a matter of fact, the Torah tells us that certain women were very beautiful. Rebecca was very beautiful. Rachel was very beautiful. Esther was very beautiful. And lest someone fall into the mental sloth of misogyny and think, oh, that's just because they're talking about women, Joseph is also described as very beautiful. And he's a man. Now, these are great people. This is not just a casual observation. Anything that you do, as a description of someone whom the text treats as a hero, has got to be very significant. Should we think of this as a kind of handicap? Look how great they became, in spite of the fact that they were beautiful. Doesn't seem so. Doesn't seem so. Nothing in the context indicates that that's so. And Jacob he certainly noticed her beauty, and that was something that he took into account in resolving to marry her. Well, there's a famous verse in the end of Mishlei, Proverbs, which we say every Friday night, singing in praise of the Jewish woman, and that is Sheker Achein V'Hevel Yofi Isha Yiras Hashem Hi Tisalal. False is charm, and beauty is empty. The woman who has awe and fear for God, she shall be praised. There you have it, black and white. Charm and beauty are false and empty, worthless. Obviously, the Torah is against these things. But then, if it is against these things, how are we going to understand that these words are used to describe the greatest people in history? And in the oral tradition, I can't say that I know the whole oral tradition, obviously. I'm not aware of any source anywhere indicating the fact that these heroes of the scriptures were beautiful is somehow a handicap that they had to overcome. Joseph beautified himself inappropriately and was attacked by Potiphar's wife. But that's because he took care to enhance his beauty, not because he was beautiful. The Gaon of Vilna has a very remarkable comment on that verse in Mishlei in Proverbs. He says, false is charm and empty is beauty when it's only external. When it's only external. But the second half of the verse rehabilitates it. The second half of the verse says, a woman who has awe and fear for God, she shall be praised, and says the Gaon of Vilna, she shall be praised for her beauty. Because if her inner reality is that of great awe and fear for God, then the external beauty reflects that inner reality, and then it's right, it's appropriate, it's good to be beautiful. The problem in beauty is not that beauty is negative. This is the theme that I started with 3 days ago. It's not that beauty is negative, it's that it creates a false impression. It creates a false reaction. It attracts, it dazzles, it draws you in. It draws you in with your sense of preciousness and value to something which may indeed be terrible. But when the beauty matches the inner, when it creates an attitude towards something which is appropriate for the inner reality, then the beauty enhances it. Indeed, the city of Jerusalem is described as beautiful. Kli Yofi, the most exquisite expression of beauty. So, that being the case, the question is not not an attitude towards beauty per se, but the reaction that beauty provokes, whether it's appropriate to the substance that lies behind it. I'll give you an example of the kind of psychological subtlety that I'm talking about. I'm often asked whether it's appropriate to read philosophy. These people who are trying to run their lives according to Jewish values and Jewish fidelity. And I say, first of all, it's a legal question. You have to go to someone who's competent to give a Jewish legal ruling. That's not me. I'm not competent to do that. But if you ask me, as someone who studied philosophy, I would say that it's only dangerous if you read a little. The danger is you read a little and you think that what you read is true. If you read a lot, you'll find out that in philosophy, every question has 5 answers and every answer has 5 objections. Philosophy is a mess. And if you want to see this, you want to verify what I'm saying, you shouldn't take what I say for granted. Look at my hat. You certainly shouldn't trust me. Look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy online and look up any subject that are written by leaders in professional philosophy. And the outline of any subject has 4 or 5 different views on the subject, and these are the standard objections, and this is where they contradict one another. That's the way it is in philosophy. So the dangers in reading a little philosophy. You read a lot of it, you'll come to understand that there's an enormous amount of controversy. When I make reference to secular philosophy, my point is almost always simply our position isn't ruled out because some of the leaders hold our position. And of course there are others who disagree because there are people who disagree with everything. But reading novels, that's much more dangerous. That's much more dangerous. Because when you read philosophy and the writer says, this is true and this is why, so you're on your guard. Oh, really? It is true? That's why? Is that a good enough reason? What other reasons can I think of? You're reading a novel. You're reading for enjoyment, for escape, and you naturally identify with the agents in the novel, and then you can be fed philosophy without your critical faculties working. It's much more dangerous to read novels. Maybe that's why I'm doing a little bit of my negative thinking about certain groups and nationalities. Maybe that's why the philosophers in France in the middle of the 20th century, the existentialist philosophers, wrote novels. Right? Sartre wrote novels, and Camus wrote novels, because you get your philosophy across to people who aren't thinking too clearly. Ayn Rand wasn't a philosopher at all. No one ever reads her work. No one discusses her in any philosophy department anywhere. But she wrote monumental novels. Atlas Shrugged, when I was in college, everybody was reading that and impressed by what? By the strength of the characters who happen to mouth certain philosophies, but not by argument, not by reasoning. So it's much more dangerous because the novel draws you in. It draws you to identify with the characters and their experiences and their challenges and their ups and downs, successes and failures, and the philosophy that you're being told goes in by the by. Goes in by the by. Nietzsche, who sometimes is cited in these discussions. I taught philosophy at Johns Hopkins. It was a very small department, only 10 of us. Every thesis had to be monitored by 3 monitors, 3 faculty members. Very rarely could you find 3 faculty members who are expert in the subject that the subject was writing about, the student was writing about. I happened to be the 3rd monitor thesis on Nietzsche. I don't know anything about Nietzsche. I'd never read him seriously. But okay, I could read what he wrote and check the internal consistency and so on and so on. I said to the student, you're doing a thesis on Nietzsche. Find me one argument, an argument to a conclusion that's controversial, designed to convince someone who might not agree with him, and an argument that's compelling in terms of logic. Find me one. One in the whole corpus. He says there aren't any. There aren't any. Nietzsche wrote poetry. He wrote in very powerful, poetical language, and he described his position, and people who are sucked into the poetry come out feeling, wow, that's really terrific. I won, but there's nothing there in terms of substance of reason. There's nothing there. So this is the danger. Now, this is the danger with beauty. Yeah. Why do you use beautiful women to sell automobiles? Because you're not going to check the acceleration, you're not going to check the spark plugs, you're not going to check the emissions. There's a beautiful girl standing there, so I'm hypnotized with the car. Right? That's to turn off your reason, to turn off your critical thinking, to suck you in via the lowest part of your nature. And that's the danger. Now, there it's obviously danger. People know it. That doesn't stop the advertisers from using it. And they only use it because it works. Otherwise, they wouldn't use it. Even though you know it, but it still works. But in other cases, like the fabulous language of Nietzsche, it can be used, and the novels that, in my time, who didn't read The Dirty Hands by Sartre? Or The Stranger by Camus? Everybody read those novels. And that's the danger. So now, the crucial thing is that when we use beauty, it has to correctly express the inner reality. So this is what you have with Rebecca, and with Rachel, and with Joseph, and with Esther. All of them were beautiful because they reflected an inner reality, and therefore because there was a common essence between the external beauty and inner reality. That's what the Gaon of Vilna says, can be praised. She can be praised for the beauty itself because it's a reflection of that inner reality. Now, what would be good to have here is some really, really solid aesthetics to figure out what beauty does, and then to apply how it expresses that inner reality. Trouble is that aesthetics is a mess. It's much of a backwater in philosophy. Usually the best philosophers don't go into aesthetics, partly because it's a wasteland. Very little progress has been made. I read a very powerful book by Gary Gutting of Notre Dame about a year ago on aesthetics, and I was very moved by it. I thought he had some very interesting things to say. But it's very difficult. So I can tell you a few things which are external, a few things that are worthwhile, which we can use. But I don't in any way pretend that this is complete or encyclopedic, or even that It won't be changed in the future. It's just some things that I think are pretty close to the surface, which might have an application. Much beauty is characterized by harmony. Harmony means organization. There's some kind of theme, and the elements in the work of art, whatever it is, all reinforce that theme. You can see how they're related. You can see how they do that. You take a painting. So a painting will have a foreground with certain subjects. It'll have a background, and there'll be, if it's a forest scene, so in the foreground there may be some animals, usually wild animals, in some kind of posture, in some kind of activity, and then you have the vegetation, and you have the time of day, and you have the quality of the air, and it all creates an integrated portrayal of a single theme. Perceiving it and seeing how all the pieces fit together is part of the idea of harmony. And that's part of that harmony is part of the idea of beauty. Now let me quote to you something which is relevant in this context and see if we can apply it. When Sarah dies, the Torah says that she was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. Each time it says years. So the oral tradition comments, this is to teach you that there are comparisons between her ages. She was at 100 as guiltless as she was at 20. And by the way, this refers to a certain tradition that in the eyes of heaven, a person does not become an adult till the age of 20. In the eyes of a civil court and a criminal court, that's the age of 13 for a boy and 12 for a girl. From there on, if they commit any crimes, they'll be penalized by the civil court as adults. But in the eyes of heaven, it only happens at the age of 20. So automatically, in the eyes of heaven, but you're guiltless at 20. She was as guiltless at 100 as she was at 20. Now you can imagine what that means about her character. And she was as beautiful at 20 as she was at 7. She was as beautiful at 20 as she was at 7. What does that mean? We, B'nai Hara, have 3 daughters and last count, something over 50 grandchildren, approximately 50 boys and girls, and approximately 10 great-grandchildren also. We've seen a lot of little girls grow up. Some of our female progeny were very beautiful at the age of 7. You look at them and you look twice. You don't look once, you look twice. But what kind of beauty is that? You might even use the word attractive. But obviously, you're not talking about something sexual. There's something in the innocence, the sense of poise, the sense of understanding that attracts your attention. I was in California at some kind of function, and there was a barbecue, and there was a long line of people waiting to get food. And I was standing in line with everybody else, and a young girl, probably about 7 years old, came over to me and said, "Would you like me to get you some food?" I don't know her, a complete stranger. I thought, wow, she's coming over to a person who is an unknown adult and dresses very peculiarly, right? And somehow she thought I shouldn't have to stand in line waiting for the food. I thought, wow, that attracts your admiration, attracts your attention. The beauty of a 7-year-old can do that. Now, imagine a 20-year-old who's beautiful like that. You look at her and you say, wow, but there's absolutely no sexual attraction whatsoever. Just something about her. You think, wow. Now, if you achieve that at the age 20, you've achieved something. I think that's unique. I can't imagine anybody, certainly in the Western world, a 20-year-old who's really beautiful, having no attraction whatsoever. It's the farthest thing from your mind. When you look at her, all you see is something of charm, harmony, substance, poise, and no sexual attraction whatsoever. So the tradition is saying something about the theme of her beauty. What theme did it project? And then every aspect of it projected that theme. That's one element of beauty, the idea of harmony, organization of a myriad of things which support this one idea or one theme. Also, the support shouldn't be mechanical. We're not talking about, just taking bricks and putting them on top of one another. You see an 80-story building in Manhattan that's made out of bricks. It's organized, all right, and it all expresses one theme. All the bricks are in the same position, row by row, floor by floor, but no, the theme has to express in a way that's not obvious. Certain things work into the theme, and then you say, aha, now I see. Because this is here, that's there, that has to be over there. And that's, and when you're first attracted, you may not see how they fit together. But there's something there which has that impression, and as you look into it more, and by the way, this especially applies in an art like music. I was a musician. Music is crucially different, let's say, from pictures, because pictures present all at once. Music relies critically on memory. You have to be able to remember what happened at the beginning and the middle to appreciate the end. The end usually brings the themes together in a certain way. And sometimes things happen in the beginning or the middle, and they seem very peculiar. Like, what are they doing there? And only if you remember it to the end, you see how the composer brings them together. So that's one element of beauty. And that is certainly an element that was used in the temple. The temple had artistic touches in many places. The statuary, there were statues in the Holy of Holies, statues of angels, and the covering of the Aron, how do you call it in English? The box with which the tablets were put.
Ark of the Covenant?
Ark, right? They call it an ark. And the divider, which was a tapestry, and was woven in various images. Indeed, according to some, the images on the inside and the outside were quite different images, and it was still woven all the way through, kind of artistic marvel. And the themes, almost everything in the tabernacle is gold. Almost everything is gold. There are a few touches of silver here and there, but almost everything is gold. Gold in our tradition signifies strict justice. Silver signifies loving kindness and mercy. Gold signifies strict justice. So then there's a message. What's going on in the temple is supposed to be satisfactory to God on the highest demands, the highest standards. No mercy. Nothing like a half-shot of performance. The guy says, okay, you tried, so it's perfectly all right. No, here the standards are the highest standards. And then that reflects on the performance that the priests go through, because they're doing it in a context of gold. So this type of organizing a myriad of items under a single theme is something that expresses beauty, and that's something which we definitely use in terms of our. What about music? Some of you know that in the temple, the sacrifices were accompanied by music. Even the Psalms, when you say the title of a Psalm, some of them are Mizmor Shir, or Shir Mizmor. Shir does not mean song. Usually, it does not mean song. Shir means poetry. In an older form of English, 200 years ago, they talked about song as poetry. Sonnets were called songs. Right? Shir means song. Mizmor means poetry. Mizmor means music. Zemer is music. So Mizmor Shir means it's a poem that was put to music. Shir Mizmor means, sometimes, it was music to which poetry was fitted. The Levites had a choir and had an orchestra in the temple, and they used music to accompany the sacrifices. Would we only know what the music was? I don't know that there's any record anywhere of what the actual music was. But the auditory integration, and as I said, visual is presented all at once, though it may take you time to digest all of it, but presented all at once. Auditory requires memory, requires continuity of experience. So you had both types of aesthetic expression going on simultaneously. Both of them to integrate into the central service of God that took place in the temple. Vocal aesthetics is something which has accompanied the Jewish people for thousands of years. When you go into a synagogue, if you have a gifted chazan, and there are even concerts of chazanas, but the prayers, when you have a gifted chazan, he uses it to beautify the prayer, which can certainly be done, I've heard it done hundreds of times, is something which is, again, an aesthetic projection. Now, this point that I made to you at the beginning was brought home to me very forcefully when I was in a certain synagogue and I was listening to the chazan singing, and he had a beautiful voice. And a friend of mine said to me, "What do you think he's thinking about that killed it?" Because he's clearly thinking about his voice. He's clearly thinking about how to hit the high note. He's clearly thinking about the aesthetics of the performance. That isn't supposed to be what it is. He's supposed to be thinking about the spiritual message, and the music is supposed to be a natural expression of the spiritual message. And in his case, it wasn't. So then I became a little more, I don't know if he did me a favor or not, but I became a little more critical and to think, who am I listening to? What's going on inside? The same complaint. Is the outside a reflection of the inside, or isn't it a reflection of the inside? I was a musician. I performed hundreds of times in orchestras and chamber music and solo. If you become a performing musician, you know, if you have to think about the notes, you have to think about which fingers to put down for which notes, forget it. You're not performing. You have to think of the meaning of the music, and then the fingers flow to express that meaning. You have to be in touch with what the music is trying to express. If you do that, then the notes, and you're well trained, then the notes will carry themselves. That's the way it has to be. And the same thing's true here. And sometimes, if you analyze the text that the person's singing, you can tell he stopped at the wrong place, or he emphasized the wrong thing. And then you know that either he's trying his best, is just out of touch, he isn't enough of a scholar to know where the emphasis should be, or he's not thinking about the text at all. The words are just there so that his beautiful voice can show itself off. That's not the beauty we're talking about. It's where the beauty expresses the inner character of the person. Now, let's work backwards. If we're talking about harmony as an element of beauty, harmony and something that's organized, fit, well crafted, what about the inside? I came across something which I guess I should have known. I had read it before, but it didn't make an impact on me. The first chapter of the Mesilas Yesharim, what's translated as the path of the just, whatever that means, he says, he's talking about our relationship to the physical pleasure. And he says, as everyone says, physical pleasure is dangerous. People can overemphasize it, can become addicted to it. But it has a positive place. Physical pleasure, he says, should be used to produce in a person nachas ruach and yishuv hadas. Nachas ruach means satisfaction, pleasantness of spirit. Satisfaction and pleasantness of spirit. Yishuv hadas means a collected mind, a clear collected mind, so as to be able, he says, to turn your heart to the service of God unreservedly. Now you have three things: physical pleasure, the state of mind, and service of God. And he's telling you the physical pleasures produce a state of mind, and with that state of mind, you can then engage in ideal service of God. What's the state of mind? Nachas ruach. Nachas ruach means something like this. How are you? Fine. I'm fine. Things are good. Things are good. I'm great. That type of expression. Not, wow, I'm great. No, fine. I'm great. Things are good. A certain calm, a certain lack of worry and anxiety. Yes, I have projects. Yes, they might succeed and they might fail. But I'm doing what I'm doing. I believe in what I'm doing. I know what I'm trying to achieve. It's important to try to achieve it. Things are fine. Things are good. When I read that recently, I thought to myself, is that how I picture great tzaddikim, great righteous people, great leaders of the generation, great saintly, holy people? I don't think I really appreciated it before. But then I thought to myself, if you are walking hand in hand with God, like King David says, Lo iraro ki ato imadi. I do not fear evil because you're with me. He didn't mean because you're with me I'm immune. He suffered every evil that a person can suffer. He suffered every evil that a person can suffer, including the loss of 2 children, one of whom rebelled against him and started a civil war. But I won't be afraid of the evil because you're with me. There was a very great man who lived in the old city, died 10 years ago, Rabbi Zilberman, a great scholar, and he created a whole movement and a whole community, which now has branches all over the world. When he was in his last weeks, someone asked him, "Are you afraid?" And he said, "My Father is holding my hand. How could I be afraid?" He took that verse in King David's the 23rd Psalm. He took that verse literally. He experienced it that way. That's what you call nachas ruach. Rav Dessler, who died of a heart attack, while the heart attack was occurring, he said to the doctor, "It's starting here, now it's moving across my chest." Nothing shook him, nothing, not even a heart attack. Because that's the way he was trained. In Kelm, that's the way we were trained. Nothing shakes you. Nothing destroys your poise, your equilibrium. That's nachas ruach. Now, beauty, which is a projection of harmony, organization, integration, that kind of beauty can be an expression of that kind of inner reality. You look at the person and you see that beauty and you say, what's inside? If the inside matches that, then the beauty itself becomes positive. Why does the beauty become positive? Because the beauty itself portrays that inside. I look at the beauty and I say, wow, that's not just a mask. I knew someone who liked to wear T-shirts which reproduced great paintings. There was such a time. You know, you can read about it in history books. No one would wear that today. You know, that's just Western trashy culture. You know, the Mona Lisa and things like that. I said, why do you want to wear a cloth that has printed on it beauty? Why not make yourself beautiful? And I don't mean to go to beauty school, go to a beauty specialist. Why don't you work on making yourself beautiful? Not just wear pieces of cloth that have beauty on them. Because this way, when I'm attracted and I think, wow, inside that person, there's this kind of reality. So a person can be like that. Then that beauty has a positive effect, has a positive role to play. That's when that the progenitor of Greece can live in the tents of Torah. And I think that's the reason why beauty was used in the temple, in the visual and in the architectural and in the musical, and why we use it in the musical as well. And we do have illustrated literature. By the way, we don't do this anymore in our holy books, but I know from 700, 800, 900 years ago, there are museum pieces where some of the holy literature, like the Book of Esther and other, had illustrations in them. I don't know what the status of it is legally, I'm not sure. I mean, in the letters, some of them were artistically done. This is something which definitely has a positive place. It just has to be under control. Now, I just want to make one last remark, lest I be misunderstood. There is a kind of fixation in aesthetics with beauty. Nelson Goodman, from whom I learned a little bit about aesthetics in graduate school, pointed out that aesthetics has a lot more to it than beauty. Some of the greatest works of art are not beautiful at all. They're very disturbing. Picasso's Guernica, which is a portrayal of the Spanish Civil War, and it's horrific. It's horrific. It give you nightmares if you look at it and contemplate it. And it is great art. So one should not confuse great art with beauty. And if you want to talk about what great art is, you have to go much further than what I have said. Some of them are immensely sad and disturbing. Arnold Emsch's Scream, which you look at that and it gives me a headache. And there's another one where a man painted a picture of his wife with a sad expression with a teardrop coming out of her eye. I saw it at the museum in Washington many years ago, and it was really sad, really sad. I don't know whether the word beauty applies to that. I don't want you to think that, from my point of view, aesthetics is captured by beauty alone. But we didn't use that type of aesthetic. For whatever reason, we didn't use that type of aesthetic. We used beauty. Oh, I should mention linguistic beauty. We have poetical passages throughout the Tanakh, and the poetry is designed to enhance the power of the communication. King Chizkiyahu lived through the siege of Sancherib. Sancherib surrounded Jerusalem with an army, and one night the army was destroyed by a miracle. The Talmud says that he could have been the Messiah had he risen to the challenge that was presented. What was the challenge? To commemorate that event in Shira. As I told you a few moments ago, Shira means poetry. Had he commemorated the event in Shira, he would have been the Messiah. What greater value can you put on something that has this aesthetic character than it could have converted him and his time and that event into the times of the Messiah? But he didn't do it. Shira somehow commemorates, it incorporates, it captures the essence of an event which no other form can, and that's why Shira is used. Much of the prophets express themselves in Shira. The Torah itself has Shira Sayam, when the sea was opened and closed on the Egyptians. It's another use of the aesthetic. So that an aesthetic, in this case, being beauty. Beauty has a very positive role to play in Jewish life, in Torah life, but it has to be an expression of the appropriate inner spiritual reality. That's the message.